This is Fue Coco. He's a Pokemon, and I love him dearly. He's my little guy. Pronoun pins and queer rep. This is a magpie on this pin saying I'm gonna yell. Hi, I'm Sam. I use they, them pronouns. I am currently a student at Simon's Rock, and I'm excited to share that I am the first student to moderate into the BARD Queer Leadership Project. I found out about Simon's Rock through two online friends I made in a group chat for fans of the show Doctor Who. I really got attached to the idea. I've always been interested in going to college, and I was kind of the mindset that I just have to get through high school, and then I can go study more of what I want. I just have to get through it. And then I was introduced to this idea of, I can just go now. And so I ended up, skipping my senior year of high school and coming here straight away. I've really enjoyed my time here thus far, and I feel like it's been an incredibly valuable experience. I feel like I've learned more about myself being here, being in a different environment, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here. The name for my concentration is Film and Digital Media Arts. I personally am hoping to focus more on multimedia and digital media as a whole, rather than strictly film. I do a lot of illustration and graphic design and storytelling, as well as a little bit of music, and I'm hoping to blend all of that together. I think the Queer Leadership Project will be an interesting thing to integrate into my art. I feel like the project will give me more information and more knowledge about the community and history as a whole, and I think that'll be incredibly valuable for my art to have more perspective on a number of different things. I think with the current climate we live in, the Queer Leadership Project is incredibly important, at the very least, to give kids a safe space to exist in. A number of states in the country right now are enacting homophobic and transphobic legislation that is causing a lot of harm already. And I think having a space where we can learn and not be afraid is incredibly important, especially now. I think having these skills of leadership within the community will be helpful, just because the nature of being a queer person is you do have to take some form of leadership in a lot of places, especially when you are maybe the one queer person in a community, depending on where you are. I'm from a place where there aren't a lot of us, or if there are, we can't be as open about who we are. And so I think it's important to know our history and be able to take a stand, because a lot of the time we do have to. And I think that's a valuable skill to have, regardless of the career one may go into, is being able to advocate for themselves and their identity.
Good evening. That was a little quiet. Maybe we can try that again. Good evening. Excellent. Very excited to have you all here. My name is John Weinstein. I'm the Provost and Vice President here at Bard College at Simon's Rock and Bard Academy at Simon's Rock, and now also the founding leader of the Bard Queer Leadership Project. We are very excited to have our first Queer Leaders Vision Forum. Our first kind of big event celebrating the start of BQLP, which already has an opening cohort of about 15 students. It seems to be growing, so let's give ourselves a hand for being some of those first students. Again, the Bard Queer Leadership Project at Simon's Rock aims to elevate LGBTQIA+ college graduates in the workforce in all fields, so we're really trying to spread queer leadership in all different fields and areas. We're also working on being space to develop practices that will help LGBTQIA students thrive both here and around the world. So we're really excited. This is an idea that started literally like exactly a year ago. And I think in very rocker spirit, we thought we can make a whole college in less than a year. So we were starting, and we're really excited. This is very intentionally kind of flying a plane that's only somewhat built, which is really intentional here because we're looking for founding students to be the co-pilots in that creation, right? We really want to create a program that's always created really by the same people that it's for, not designed for people or at people, right? So we're really looking for that. And that said, we are now very actively starting to recruit the second cohort of students. So if you know a young person where this might be the right step for them, students can come at the traditional time after high school. They can come early, as we've done for many years. They can come later if they've had a varied school path and a non-traditional student kind of in the other age direction. We also are going to be having a kind of certificate program. So if students want to kind of study abroad, so to speak, here at Simon's Rock, they could come for a semester or for a year and do a certificate in queer leadership. So we're really excited about all these developments. Something that I'm also very excited about is my dear friend and longtime colleague, Dr. Carla Stevens, has joined us as the first director of the Bard Queer Leadership Project. We go back a ways to our wonderful days in Newark, where we started a whole different wonderful school. And one of our students then once said, when Carla succeeded me as principal there, well, I guess if we're going to have someone who's exactly like Dr. Weinstein, but a different person, I guess Dr. Stevens is the person who is Dr. Weinstein, just someone else. So I kind of thought when we needed to duplicate myself to get this work done, I thought, who better than my dear colleague, Carla Stevens. So I'm going to first hand it over to Carla, who is going to introduce one of our speakers, and then I will introduce the other.
Thank you so much, John, and it is a great pleasure to be you. So, I am going to have the great honor and pleasure of introducing Jim Fielding, a native of Toledo, Ohio, born to an upper middle class family. Jim Fielding knew as a child that he was queer. His story may be familiar to many of you here. He was bullied in school, feared the judgment of family and friends. He suffered the self-doubt, sometimes self-hatred, and depression that too many LGBTQIA+ youth feel. However, he now views his early life challenges and the alienation of difference as both burdens and blessings that provided him skills, resilience, and motivation to excel, to develop a unique, transformational leadership style. And excel he has. Currently the president of Archer Gray's Co-Lab division, Jim has been the chief executive or president in such entertainment giants as 20th Century Fox, DreamWorks Animation, Claire's, and Disney stores worldwide. Jim's newest venture, his book, All Pride, No Ego, is part memoir as well as a guidebook for cultivating successful and transformational leadership skills. In it, he synthesizes key leadership principles while also sharing his personal path to a healthier, happier, more authentic life. In its June 6, 2023 issue, Fortune magazine announced that there were only 4 openly gay CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, up from 0 a decade ago. The Bard Queer Leadership Project is honored to have one of them here to speak with us this evening, providing insights that will help and inspire students to shatter that rainbow ceiling. It is my personal honor and great pleasure to introduce you to Jim Fielding.
And there's the book. So in thinking about, again, the vision forum, which Jim really helped create the concept for, Jim said, can I bring Schuyler with me? And having gone to the same college as Schuyler, I've read about Schuyler for many years, and was like, yeah, I think that'll work. I was really excited. And I think as this evolves, it's great to have 2 speakers, who complement one another, and we'll see them in dialogue with each other. And I'm hoping this will be a format that we continue. It also really helps us expand our communities, right? So I'm really excited to have Schuyler Bailar with us. Schuyler Bailar is the first transgender athlete to compete in any sport on an NCAA Division I men's team. By 15, he was one of the nation's top 20 15-year-old breaststroke swimmers. By 17, he and his relay team set a national age group record. In 2019, Schuyler finished 4 years of swimming for Harvard University on what ended up being the 8th fastest men's team in the nation and Harvard's winningest team since 1961. Schuyler's best swim secured him as Harvard's 3rd fastest breaststroke swimmer for the 2018-2019 season and placed him in the top 15% of the NCAA overall. Schuyler's difficult choice to transition while potentially giving up the prospect of being an NCAA champion was historic and timely. His story has appeared everywhere from the Washington Post to 60 Minutes and The Ellen Show. MTV cited his story in their list of 2015's best moments for the trans community, and BuzzFeed named him one of the 11 transgender people who are shifting our views. Schuyler's advocacy has earned him numerous prestigious awards, including Harvard's rarely awarded Director's Award. Schuyler is the author of multiple books, one which is already out and is available outside for purchase and signing, is Obi Is Man Enough, a novel about a young transgender swimmer and their experiences. Highly recommended it. And a new book that is coming out, which we only have in the postcard version right now, but will be out soon, He, She, They, How We Talk About Gender and Why It Matters, which I know will be a very popular book here at Simon's Rock. We're eagerly awaiting this to come out in about a month, I think. Excellent. So very excited about that as well. And we will certainly look forward to talking to you about that also. But I'm very honored and so excited to introduce Schuyler Bailar. And now, Jim and Schuyler are going to engage in conversation around queer leadership, and then yes, and now they talk. Then Carla and I will get the honor of asking a few start-off questions, and then we'll be opening it out to our wonderful audience here in the McConnell Theater, as well as our online audience, to ask questions as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Jim and Schuyler.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Very excited to be here. We had a lovely drive out here, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
It was like our first date.
Yeah, it was like, that's the first thing he said to me. We got in the car and he's like, this is like a first date. Oh, okay.
Because we knew each other only virtually.
Yeah.
The glories of Zoom.
So Jim, I'm curious, as I was listening to your bio, which I've read in various formats, it's always different to like have a bio read in front of you while also being watched and also experiencing it. And I'm not sure if I was making things up, but I think I saw some emotions in your face. So I was curious what it's like to listen to sort of your list of successes coming right after the first 3 sentences, which are that you were bullied, you were experiencing a lot of self-doubt, self-hatred. What's it like to sit here and listen to that bio?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw emotion. I mean, you'll hear emotion in my voice. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's humbling, number one. Thank you very much. And it's, it just still shows me that there's work to do, because I'm not celebrating enough the good stuff, and like I kind of got hung up on the first 3 sentences, and it pulls out the insecurities and a lot of it. And I think what's been great about the book and the book tour is just getting to celebrate more of the successes. But I totally agree with what Carla said. I firmly believe I was only able to do that because I went through the tough stuff. Like it made me stronger. It made me more resilient, and it made me hungrier, I think. I think it made me more ambitious, more driven. So, but it's hard, it's, writing the book was hard, like writing the book's hard, reading the book is hard. But I'm just so glad it's out in the world. And this whole environment and the program and meeting John, I literally met John, just so you guys know, because I saw it on Instagram, and I was like, this can't be right. Is this a typo? There's like a queer leadership program. Like, you can actually major in this? Like, I literally thought it was a typo in my Instagram feed, and I DM'd him, and like a young person, and we started a conversation, and here we are. I think it's amazing.
Well, that actually segues into a question I wanted to ask you, which is about queer leadership specifically. So 1 out of 4, you said that the Fortune 500 article, did I make that up? The 1 out of 4.
There's 4 Fortune 500.
Right.
4 Fortune 500.
Thank you.
Out CEOs.
Right. Okay. So 4 out of probably whatever, hundreds.
Out of 500. So there's 496
hundreds.
Curious. No, I'm kidding.
So
there's 496 other. There's 496 other.
Yeah. So when I heard that, even like I know that we have a lot of work to do, and that's I'm an advocate. That's what I do, and I heard that number, and maybe even you all here in the audience were like, whoa, really 4? That's it. And so when I think about queer leadership, it's interesting because we've got the 4, and then we've also got queer leadership as like a topic that I've never really talked about, and that you also thought was a joke when you got an email. So tell me a little bit about what queer leadership means to you. I know you've written a book about it, but so the big question. But I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of like what does it comes to mind when you say queer leadership?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I mean it's I've been asked several different ways, like, because you were queer, are you more successful because you were queer, right? Like, do you lead a certain way because you're queer? And it's made me stop to think. And I do think, and what I write about in the book is, I do think of it now as like a form of a superpower, because I think that I blend my experiences. I think that I have higher EQ. That's a word that you talk a lot about, emotional quotient. I have intelligence. I have IQ. I know that. But I think my EQ is a little bit higher because of what I went through. And I think that makes me a better team builder and a better gatherer of people, because I have an empathy for all differences, not just queer. And I think that's a lot of what I talk about in the book is authentic leadership is about creating safe, productive spaces for all people to live their authenticity, not just queer people. But my theory is, if I focus on creating what's right for queer people, that all marginalized people will feel safe to live their authenticity and to share their differences. And so as I look back now, I do think it's a big part of my success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, as you were saying that you think queerness is perhaps a part of your superpower, and that it can then help everybody because of your EQ, help everybody be a better version of themselves, and then perhaps, better at a company, better employee, better leadership, and so on. I was actually thinking one of the things that I think queer people do is we actually help inspire other people, even if they're not marginalized, to step more into their own safety. And as we were driving here, one of the things you said was there actually have been a significant amount of people that are not queer, that aren't LGBTQ+, that have come to your events and said, hey, this resonated with me. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that as well, because a lot of the work that you have done has been not actually with community, because you haven't had community. It's been to other people who are not part of the community. What has that taught you?
It's funny. Schuyler and I were talking the way over. He asked me what the biggest surprise had been so far on the book tour. And I said, the biggest surprise is that cisgender, straight white men come up to me and first off come to the signings and then come up to me and say, your leadership lessons and your story really resonated with me. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, like, okay, I was afraid of you when I was 14, but okay. But it's interesting. And then it makes me feel good because I really do think the 10 lessons, it's organized around 10 lessons. And I really do think when you read the 10 lessons, it's not like the first lesson is control the controllable, but leave space for the possible. It doesn't say, and be queer, right? So I do think it's a universal lesson. And I knew from my time in leadership and management that women leaders I knew it would resonate with women leaders. I knew the book would resonate with women leaders because there's that certain amount of the glass ceiling for women and, a little bit of the rainbow ceiling for us. But that has been a pleasant surprise. And I have spent most of my time, we were talking about this, and you have a chapter on it in your new book, Allyship. I've spent more time with allies and ally education than actually in community because of the jobs I was in and the teams I was managing. And for me to be successful, I had to manage the entire spectrum of humanity. I couldn't by the way, I wouldn't want 50 people just like me. We'd be horrible. We'd never get anything done, and we'd be like decorating, and we'd be doing like these weird things. But so I had to have the ability to manage, the straight guy with 4 children and make it as safe and authentic and effective for him as I did for a queer 25-year-old. I had to, or I wasn't going to be successful at Disney and Fox and all those places.
I think that's really powerful, and I think it kind of speaks again to queerness perhaps being part of a superpower, because it's about, I think, making sure that everybody has a space to be themselves, like you said. I as a trans person, I'm constantly told, and this is one of the reasons I'm so excited you wrote this book. As a trans person, as a queer person, as a mixed race person, I've been told quite frequently, either implicitly or explicitly, that I don't have a place in sports or in healthcare or in the bathroom or in. Is that me? Don't know. Okay. Well, anyways, the mic is telling me I don't have a space in talking in this moment. Anyways, it's cutting me off. So there's been lots of spaces I felt like I don't belong in. And I think that one of the things I'm hearing as you're talking and as I read the book was that actually this is a space we should lean into, that leadership is a space where queer people actually, our skills and our experiences as queer and trans people can actually lend us to be better leaders. Yeah. And I read that in your book as well, where you said maybe it is a superpower. So I would love to hear more about that. I know you talked about the EQ, but I'm thinking a little bit about the hardship that you experienced, that lending you a little bit of, I think, resilience, but also I hear it as beyond just the hardship. I hear it as something more innate in how you are and how you connect and sort of your open-mindedness and your creativity. So I don't know if there's one specific question there, but I would love your thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. You loaded a lot there. Okay. No, I mean, I think there's skills that I employ as a leader or a manager of people, and not even people, I just call them human, right? Like if you're managing humans, specific skills that they teach you, like active listening. Like I think I have really good active listening skills. So, kind of hearing what's behind the actual statement and kind of watching the body language and trying to understand the context of a conversation. I think part of, the relationship that we've been developing and this friendship, working relationship, I'm really good with different generations. I'm really good with managing different ages and understanding that a 23-year-old fresh out of university has to be managed differently than a 53-year-old and has different needs and different desires at work. I mean, it's almost like a class in business school would have been called like situational leadership, right? That like one leadership style doesn't work for an entire team, and it doesn't matter if the team is 5 people or 500 people. And when I was CEO of Claire's, technically there was 20,000 people that worked in that company. I obviously didn't touch each one of them, but I think, like, again, situational leadership, I've always had global responsibility. And so I talk about in the book, you can't manage people in Korea or Mexico the same way that you manage people in Los Angeles. There's different culture, there's different language, there's different standards, there's different expectations. And so I think all of that led me to be successful. I think also, because I think we're about community. We keep talking about community. I also talk in the book about 2 heads are better than one. Like I believe in getting people in a room and solving problems together. And if you bring a problem into my office, I'm going to ask you the first thing, well, what do you think we should do? It's not like I was never that manager or leader who was like, do it this way. Here's the 3 steps and go away and do it and don't bother me anymore. And so I think all of those skills that maybe came naturally over time were born out of, and Carla mentioned it, and it's hard to say, but there's periods in my life where I thought what the world would be like without me. Like I went through that horrible angst of the 70s and 80s and considered options more than once. And I think in a weird way that it's that empathy thing. Like at the end of the day, I want to love what I do. I want to have passion for work, but it is a job and it is work. Like it's only one part of your life. And so I think I also take it very seriously that I want people to feel motivated. I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel respected, because I do think we have a choice, right? Especially when you work in a company. I was in LA for a long time in the media business. there's other options. Like if people aren't happy at work, there's other places they can go. And so selfishly, I wanted to hang on to my talent. And so I thought, how do I hang on to this talent? Okay, I've got to make it work for them.
I mean, one of the ways that it sounds like you did that was also by diving into chosen family, and that's one of the lessons in the book as well, which is cultivating chosen family. And the first thing when I get trans kids reaching out to me, trans people reaching out to me, and they ask, what advice do you have for me? Pretty much, no matter what they ask me, my answer is, I need you to find community, and whether that be so and so online that you have created an online relationship, whether that be a queer resource center, whether that be something like this, the queer leadership program here. Find some sort of community, because I think it can absolutely be life-saving. And it sounds like when you were a kid, you didn't have a whole lot of that. I think right now there is more ability to connect right through social media, through just sort of the globalization of the world that's taken place over the past 40 years. But I think we still are having similar problems, right? There's still lack of representation. There's still not a whole lot of queer CEOs. I was still the first trans athlete in 2015 to be on a men's team in D1 sports, right? We're going through a lot of firsts.
Still pioneers. Yeah.
So even though we're intergenerationally related, we're still going through a lot of firsts. And I'm curious what advice then you would have for college students, for the folks here who might be experiencing a lot of the same things that you did when you were a kid.
Yeah. Well, I think first off, you picked the right place. Because the community is almost built in to which I think is amazing, right? And I went to a much bigger school. I went to Indiana University, which I loved, but in the this is where I sound like a dinosaur. I started college in 1983, and there was no LGBTQ center. There was no mental health resource. I don't even think we had mental health resources. I can't remember. There was no place, even though I was having these feelings and having this anxiety, there was really nowhere to go to talk about it. And there was no bookstore. Frankly, the bookstores were kind of dirty bookstores. They weren't really educational bookstores. And so you were really kind of hunting and pecking to build community. And I agree with your advice when students talk to me, or anybody talks to me who is anywhere in the rainbow, I'm like, just please work on whatever you want to call it. I call it chosen family in the book, your network, your found family. I am blessed. I have a great natural family. That's great. Not everybody does. And sometimes you need that found family or chosen family to supplement what you're not getting from your natural family. I was able to use it in a complementary way. But I know that I wouldn't be anywhere where I was today without my chosen family. And I also talk in the book about my work family. And I make it very clear to people that does not mean it's the people that you go out to happy hour with. It does not mean you have to socialize together. It doesn't mean that. It's people that you feel like you trust implicitly and support you unconditionally. And I was blessed because I started to have this cohort of people that would follow me from Disney to DreamWorks to Fox, and you develop this kind of shorthand where you just are able to move faster because you have that community feeling, you have that commonality, and it was huge. It was a huge asset. And again, when people would talk about me, they say, oh, Jim builds incredible teams. And I'm like, did you look? Half of these people have worked with me for 15 years. It's not that hard. You just have to do it, and then you just kind of bring them along with you. And in writing the book and looking back on that, I realized that was such an asset, such a tool.
One of the things you said in the book also that I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about here is the power that community can have on how you talk about yourself, how you talk to yourself. One of the things that came up a lot in the book was negative self-talk and how that has harmed you in the past and probably still harms you here and there now. I know that sometimes it doesn't ever completely go away. And I think for a lot of queer and trans youth, even now, negative self-talk, or rather the internalization of homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia, biphobia, and so on, other systems too, right? Internalized racism, internalized ableism, we can go on. These are probably even more harmful sometimes than the external forms because we can't ever escape, right? They're inside. And I know for me, unpacking my own internalized transphobia, I think is going to be a lifelong journey to some degree because I don't understand, however, I have to continuously shed, right, those layers. So I'm curious, how in part community, as you just said, but I'm curious what other skills, what other ways you have used to work through that internalization, the negative self-talk of homophobia.
Yeah, I mean, like,
just a small question.
Breathing is one of them. I developed tools like journaling and yoga and trying mindfulness. I'm not that great, but I'm okay. Like, I use my little apps to try and kind of turn my brain off. And I think the whole thing you're talking about, that inner dialogue, whatever you call it, I talk about my Jiminy Cricket in the book, but your inner voice, your inner saboteur sometimes, I think the hardest thing for me throughout my life, and it is a lifelong practice, is a lot of times what people were saying to me externally when I was getting bullied and I was physically and mentally and emotionally harassed and hurt, physically hurt. The worst part was what I was saying about myself internally was 10 times worse than anything they were saying to myself, because I wasn't loving myself. Like, it sounds so cliche, and I wanted to change. I thought I was broken. I thought I could change. I thought I needed to change, or I wasn't going to have a happy life. And so I think the hardest thing about the journey was anything they were doing to me, even though it hurt, was nothing compared to what I was saying to myself. And I think even tonight, I mean, I will be totally honest with you, you guys know once you read the book, I was freaking out about what I was wearing tonight. And Schuyler, God bless him, had to come into the room and be like, I think it's fine. And I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Like
I'm 58 years old and it's hot as crap. But, and I'm not sure, but I brought like all these different kinds of outfits. And he's like, I think that one's fine. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I was worried about it, right? And it was your inner voice again saying, you look fat in that. Or it's that stuff that you just, and I'm still dealing with it at 58. And the difference is now is I identify it and I'm like, like, you go over there, you're fine, you know what you're here for. That's the difference. That's what comes with age and wisdom. And part of the reason I wrote the book is I want, especially those of you right here, to learn that earlier. Because I wish I would have learned that when I was 26 instead of 56, because there was a lot of angst in between that was unnecessary.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm hearing is also when you said that I want to keep that part out, like what I hear is also not necessarily like a dismissal of that feeling either, because there's a real reason that we fear the things that we fear, right? Like, people are really mean about bodies and body shaming. People are like, do have standards for what we wear and how we look. People do have homophobic beliefs, right? So like, it makes sense. This is what I always like to tell the people I talk to, is like, it makes sense that we feel these things. It's more like what we do with it when it comes up, which is why I said
right?
Exactly. And it's like a constant process, because like I wear a Speedo when I go to the pool, and I'm pretty naked in a Speedo, and it's to me very obvious that I'm transgender, right? My scar is across my chest, my Speedo is empty, or however you would like to describe it, right? And people could see my body, right? And I had a friend tell me once, a couple of years ago, he said something about being nervous about putting on a Speedo. He's like, but you probably never feel that way. And I was like, what are you talking about? Every single time I put on a Speedo, I am nervous about what somebody else has to say about it, but I do it anyways. And he was like, you're what? You are nervous? And I was like, how could I not be? Like, this world is really transphobic. Of course I'm nervous. But then I say, okay, let's you said it just a second ago, you go over here and you care for that part of you. You say, oh, it makes sense that you feel that way, and we're still going to do this thing. I imagined you've done that so often in your life, where you've had to put something aside, and you talk about it in the book too.
Compartmentalizing.
Exactly, compartmentalization. So curious if you could talk more about that skill of compartmentalization.
Right, and I'm looking at you two to make sure on time, because
I think we have like
guys have questions.
I've got you 5 more minutes or so.
Okay, we're good. Cool. Okay, we could be up here for hours. Listen, you should have seen the car ride. Compartmentalizing again. I don't think I realized this, but I have this really unique ability to compartmentalize and be like, okay, you're going to go in that box. And I totally love what you say, honor it. Like, I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to get back to that feeling. But right now I don't have time to deal with that. So I'm going to put you on a little shelf in my brain. And where I really talk about compartmentalization was when my dad passed away. And so I was CEO of Claire's at the time, my first CEO job of a retailer at Christmas. I'd been in the job less than 6 months, and my dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in October and died Thanksgiving, basically. And so not only, was I dealing with losing a father as the oldest and, the only son, I was also the executor and had to, do all that business side of death, as we talk about, and take care of my mother and take care of my sister and my nieces and, run a company, right? And it's funny because I am a journaler. And when I was writing the book, I thought, I got to go back and read, because I wasn't really remembering that. I remembered it, but I wasn't really remembering the details of the period. The journaling then, I swear to God, it's in Sanskrit or something, because I don't even really understand what I was writing. And what I realized is that I was just completely on autopilot, and I compartmentalized, and I was just like, I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And I tell a story in the book that people still can't believe, but my dad passed away when I was in the air. I had seen my dad, said, I'll see you at Christmas. I landed back in Chicago, there in Phoenix, and I had like 35 texts and messages. And in the O'Hare baggage claim, I got through to my sister, and she was crying, and she kept saying, he's gone. And I literally was like, your dog ran away? Like, it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, who's gone? Your dog? Because she had a boy dog. And she's like, Jimmy, like, which is what my family calls it. She's like, Dad died. And I'm like, I just saw him this morning. She's like, he didn't wake up from his nap, blah, blah, blah. And I just collapsed in O'Hare, like literally. And my partner, and we had like an Uber driver, we're just like, because my partner didn't know what had happened, because I just kind of collapsed. So that was Thursday. And Friday morning, I had to do an earnings call with Wall Street because I was the CEO, and it was too late to cancel it. And so I called my CFO at home. I told him what had happened, and he said, okay, we'll figure this out. And I said, no, we're going to do it. Here's the deal. You got to script it. I got to read the script, and I cannot take any questions. Like, you have to handle all the questions. And that next morning, they got me a driver, and the driver picked me up, and I was going right from the earnings call to the airport to fly back to my dad. And I think the only way I got through that is I completely was like living outside my body. I know it sounds weird. I just did it. I had a responsibility. I think it's that Midwesterness in me. And I did the earnings call, and he took some questions, and I got back in the car, and I went to my family in Phoenix. And I realized that's a skill now. Like, it's an actual thing that I was able to function. I just turned part off, and I was like, I'm going to come back and honor you. I'm going to deal with you, but right now I have to do this. And I don't love that part, but I can do it.
Well, I think the key part of it is the combo, right? It's like being able to compartmentalize for a moment, but then coming back to it. Because if we don't come back to it, then compartmentalization isn't compartmentalization, it's avoiding, right? And like avoiding's not so great. Yeah, so it sounds like the combo is really what's important. I'm sure there's times when you've compartmentalized and not come back to it, and that's when we get those pains that we have to deal with in therapy.
Yeah, that's what therapy's for, right? But yeah, and coaches. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that was the benefit of writing the book. Like, I actually think writing the book was a really selfish exercise because
lesson number 9 is that you shouldn't be selfish.
Selfish is not a bad word. That's lesson number 9. That's again another late learning in life, that selfish equals self-care. And it really hit me. I talk about it in the book. It hit me when I was like on all these airplanes when I was traveling, and they do that safety thing, and they say, if the oxygen mask drops from the ceiling, put yours on first before you take care of the next person next to you. And I'm a real caretaker and caregiver, and I'm sure I would be the person trying to put it on everybody else who would then forget to put on his own mask. And like, that just kind of struck me. And I was like, oh yeah. And what would happen to me, why I wrote that chapter, was I would give and give and give, and then I'd have like these breakdown weekends where I would just physically get sick, cold, flu-y, and I'd be laying in bed feeling sorry for myself and probably a little angry and bitter, because I'd be like, why am I giving so much and it's not working? And that's when I realized that like I was not a good person. I was not a good son. I was not a good partner. I was not a good manager and leader unless I made sure that I was spiritually, mentally, and emotionally and physically strong. That if I did my inventory and I was good with all of those parts, that I was going to be better for other people. And that again was a late in life learning.
One of the things we talked about in the car that I think relates to that is and you talk about it in the book as well, is the value of relationships. And so there's the chapter on chosen family, found family, and how important that is both in a work capacity and how it can help you, but also in your life. And then you also, I noticed, talked about your own personal long-term relationships, each of them having different outcomes for different reasons. And one of them that I like, it really sort of resonated with me / like made me think a lot about my own life, was about a relationship that ended because you prioritized work over the partnership. And so the compartmentalization sort of thing maybe went a little too much. And it's not a judgment, I'm more pulling from the way you wrote it. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that and kind of how you've learned that selfishness involves taking care of a relationship perhaps instead of work, or how you find that balance. Because I think a lot of young people here, we can do work at any time, always, which isn't necessarily not true of your generation, but I think because of the availability of social media and internet and computer and just like even the pandemic, like most of my clients that are kids, they are constantly doing homework or doing something because there's no way to get off of it. And so balance, I think, is even socially, because a lot of people's social lives are on their phones, right? So I'm curious if you could talk about finding that balance of work, play, home, relationships.
Yeah, I read about it in the book. I mean, I'm a serial monogamist. I've had 4 long-term relationships, and I totally sacrificed the first one for my career. Did I know that at the time? No. That's the benefit of hindsight. But I was in a 14-year relationship, and I was chasing the career, chasing the goals, and he told me more than once he didn't want to do that anymore because chasing at that time meant moving and, taking on more responsibility. And he was like, I just want to be in one place. It's not working for anymore. And I remember he said to me, he said, I think you're part gypsy. Like, he said that because he said, you're okay with this. Like, you're okay with this kind of vagabond moving every 2 or 3 years. It's not working for me. And he never really gave me an ultimatum, to his credit. But I think if he had given me an ultimatum, I would have still chosen the career, which I'm kind of embarrassed to admit. But, and it's been interesting because we're still in touch. He's married to somebody else. They have a great marriage. He knows my current partner, and it's a great friendship now. And he's read the book, and he knows that story is about him. And he called me, and we talked about it for about an hour. And I said, his name's David, and I said, David, I want to say I'm sorry. Like, I know, but that Jim that did that at 36 was a different person. And I just want to say I'm sorry. And he goes, that's so unnecessary, but thank you. That was nice closure. Like, I could almost feel closure.
Do you think there's anything that you could have said, like you now could say to you then, like truly that would have actually changed? Because I think a lot of times we make mistakes that nothing could have actually changed.
Well, I think that's part of the title, the All Pride, No Ego. I think the ego was taking over then. And I think what 58-year-old Jim would have said is, listen, do the active listening, sit and talk to your partner and really think about the ramifications of your decisions. And is there a more balanced solution? Does it have to be black or white? Like, look for the gray. I think that's what I would say now.
I love that. Look for the gray. Okay, last question, and then I'll turn it over to you two, right? Because you said 40-ish minutes. Okay, cool. My last question. So you've already mentioned it once, but for anybody who hasn't read that chapter yet, one of them is about finding your Jiminy Cricket or listening to your Jiminy Cricket. Some people might not know. Raise your hand if you know who Jiminy Cricket is.
Oh, that's good.
Wow, I'm impressed.
Disney
actually.
would be so impressed.
Yeah. This is not a Disney ad, but good job. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that chapter and kind of what I'm imagining actually is the one of the most beautiful parts of the book that I really resonate. I came in as soon as I finished. I came into your room and told you this, but is that you have your Zoom picture as a picture of you when you were 5, and you're wearing a suit, and you write about this photo saying at that point you hadn't internalized all this homophobia. You didn't have a dream of who exactly you were supposed to be or all these sort of like expectations of you. You were just a little kid wearing a suit and being happy. And it sounds like that's really connected to Jiminy Cricket. So can you share a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about, again, we've talked a little bit about, your instinct or your inner voice. Jiminy Cricket is my favorite Disney character. When you work at Disney, on day one, you go to orientation. It doesn't matter what job you're in. Everybody goes through the same orientation, and you go around the room, and they ask you who your favorite Disney character is and why, and then that character gets put on your name badge. We all wear name badges at Disney. So mine
Can you ever change it?
Mine said, well, this is interesting. So mine said Jiminy Cricket, and I thought, ooh, that's kind of weird. But some people were like, well, I have a favorite villain and a favorite, they're like, I like Cruella de Vil and Woody from Toy Story. But I was always Jiminy Cricket, and it was because Pinocchio was the first Disney movie that I remember seeing in a theater with my mom. And even though it's really, honestly now, it's a pretty dark movie. Like when you go back and watch the original animated one, there's a lot of themes in there. But I immediately first of all, I liked the way that Jiminy looked. I liked the way he was dressed, but also I liked what he represented. He was like a best friend and a moral conscience, and he was trying to keep Pinocchio on the straight and narrow. Like he was trying to be a loyal friend. And I just grew up liking Jiminy Cricket, so it just instantly came out of my mouth at orientation. There wasn't even a hesitation. But I had to learn, because I think everything's like a blend of data and instinct, right? And it changes over time because you get more life experiences and you get more, your instinct changes and grows. I had to learn to balance the gut and the instinct. And a little bit, one of the things I did in the pandemic, I write about in the book, is I binge watched RuPaul Drag Race from the first episode to, like, I could win a trivia contest. Don't screw with me, because I will win. But every episode ends, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love someone else? Like, I've heard it so many times now. And that really resonated with me, is that I had to fully love myself and fully accept myself unconditionally, or I was never going to be able to accept unconditional love from anybody else. And so even though I would get mad and say, oh, they don't love me unconditionally, it was a big issue with my dad and me. It was because, honestly, I didn't love myself unconditionally. And so the whole chapter is about whatever you call your voice. I just happen to name mine Jiminy Cricket. And I hear him. And he has a different voice than mine. He has the Jiminy voice from the movie when he talks to me. So, and I have visual representations of Jiminy. Like, I've collected, working at Disney, all these, and I keep him around the office because then he's there reminding me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. The next Jiminy Cricket I find, I'm going to send to you.
Thank you. Yes, they're very big at flea markets. Like, you'll find them, like, he's not the most popular Disney character, but he's mine.
If you had to, last fast round question. If you had to pick one villain, who's your favorite Disney villain?
Ooh. I kind of like Scar from Lion King.
I was going to say that.
I kind of like Scar. I think I was attracted to him, kind of. I think he's kind of hot. Like, I think he's kind of that bad boy. Like, I kind of like Scar, and he was very ambitious. Like, he was driven. Scar was driven. He
driven to the wrong things.
Yeah, driven to the wrong things, but Scar. I'd say Scar.
He's a good bad boy. All right. Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah.
I'll go. And so you said people are always asking me about the relationship between queerness and my leadership. So, of course, that's what my question's about. But so I will read it. I was surprised and impressed, because I have to read this part too. I was surprised and impressed by your courage and vulnerability in revealing so much of yourself in All Pride and No Ego. As I read, sometimes I wondered, throughout your career, how often did you think, this thing is happening to me because I'm gay, and here's my response?
God, that is good. You're a professional. That is deep. A lot. I mean, there was many times where something, I think good and bad, happened, where I'd be like, it happened to me because I'm gay, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Schuyler, but I think my reaction to what happened was totally colored and flavored by all of my experiences as a growing up as a gay kid, and I didn't come out till I was 26, by the way. I know you guys haven't read the book yet. So it was like 20 years of angst. I talk about knowing, since I was 6 or 7. And the reason I picked the Zoom picture, and it's when I'm 5, is I think in hindsight, it was the last time I was 100% happy, because I was still innocent and I was still childlike and I still thought everything was possible. And that angst started creeping in 6, 7, and 8. And I can look at pictures of myself now where I'm like, I had tension in my face. I'd be like a 13-year-old with tension. That's not good. So I do think it's a huge part of the story. And, when I wrote the dedication in the book, it was one of the last things I wrote. Like, I wrote the whole book, and, they go, you have to write a dedication. And, I dedicated it to people who felt, I talk about all leaders, but particularly young leaders who feel like they don't fit in. And I think so much of how I manage as an adult and how I managed in all these jobs I had was because I lived so long thinking I didn't fit, and then when I decided I did fit and I was right where I was supposed to be, there was like a flip. Like, I could feel, it was almost like a switch went on, and more positivity came out.
I'm going to follow up with a question for Jim. And thinking about what you were saying with compartmentalization, and I could certainly see where compartmentalizing and queerness might be skills that go together. It's also from my experience, both in my own kind of leadership roles and other leaders that I've known, particularly those in business, that it seems like that compartmentalization is also a very key leader skill. One of my second ice dance partner's husband is the CEO, and at one point said to me, "You're just like my husband. You can so compartmentalize." And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And so I'm wondering, if queer people are good at compartmentalizing, and compartmentalizing is a good skill for leaders, might it be the case that there's some connectivity, like are queer people very well suited to be leaders, even if we've been so woefully underrepresented in leadership circles?
For sure. I mean, no, I in other interviews I've done, and if you ever are bored and want to follow me online, like, I'm sticking my neck out there, I've said 4 out of 500 is completely inappropriate, because even if you just take 10%, which is a bullshit number, we all know that. Okay, there's 500, there should be 50, right? And just pure representation numbers, there should be 50 CEOs out of 500, even if you just take the 10% number. And I absolutely think, and I had an interviewer ask me, and they said, well, how does that make you feel? And I'm like, it makes me mad, but it also makes me sad, because I think there's talented people who should be running these companies who are not getting their shot because of their queerness. And that is what I'm going to use my platform now for.
Yep.
I just wanted to add on to that, because I think one of the things that we also, this is like an endeavor I've been starting to try, which is that I just heard you say we are not getting, like, there are queer people out there not getting their shot because of their queerness, and I have started making a tiny shift, which is they're not getting their shot because of queer phobia, not because of their queerness. And I think, like, not to correct you, but for, I think all of us, it's like a small edit that to me is like deeply impactful, because I have said for my whole awareness of my transness. Oh, I don't want my transness to stop me. Oh, I don't want my transness to stop me from a relationship. I don't want my transness to stop me from sports, from X, Y, and Z. And I've realized that my transness will actually never stop me. If anything, I think there's a deep power in my trans and queerness, but transphobia could stop me, right? It actively could stop me. And it's something that, like, it's less that I want you to know that, Jim, although I do want you to know that, but more for anybody here, like, if you're listening, your queer and transness is not going to stop you, but other people's bigotry might. And then the question is, how do you get around it, of course, right? But I think it's like, when I think about also the systems that stop people from becoming a 50 out of 500 instead of the 4, it's also, how do we, it's not just like, okay, I was trying out for my, to be the president of Disney World stores. That's not the right order of words, I'm sorry. But if I'm not, I'm trying out as an athlete for that job, like, it's not that my transness is going to stop me from going from, like, vice president to president. It's going to stop me from, or transphobia would stop me from even entering the field, right? Even thinking I could get the job. And I think that's the other thing for us to think about systemically, is what are the barriers that are actually stopping us from even entering the fields that would then allow us to be in those leadership roles.
Well, I want to add on and also ask you a question, Schuyler, that's related. So I'm a historian. And I don't know how long I'd been a historian when someone did what you just did. I used to talk about Black people as slaves and had people remind me that Black people were not slaves, they were enslaved. And that's a very important difference, in kind of the same way that you're talking about the difference between your transness stopping you and transphobia stopping you. So thank you. I have also, in my research, heard you talk about allyship, and I would ask you if you would, talk more about what allyship is and when it is most important, or what it means to be an ally.
Yeah, I mean, big question. And I think the shameless plug is that my book is, as much as I can get a succinct answer as possible. But so when I think about allyship, a lot of people want, like, a list of to-dos, right? And I can give you a few, right? Call trans people by their right name and pronouns. That one seems obvious, but unfortunately is not to many people. Call us by, correct people when they call us the wrong name and call us the wrong pronouns. Advocate for us to be allowed to be in spaces that are very basic, such as bathrooms, such as healthcare, such as sports, such as schools, such as, PTA meetings, so on, right? Books, right now there's lots of places that are banning talking about us in books. So those are, like, the basic actions, in my opinion. They are unfortunately not basic in that there are 500 plus bills trying to stop all of the things that I've just named. But to me, those are basic because they're logistical and this is like an action that I can do that's, good enough. But really what's at the core of all of that is if you don't actually see a trans person as a whole human, if you don't see a queer person as a whole human, it doesn't matter what name you call me. We can feel the difference, right? Because I have people in my life who will call me the right name, call me the right pronouns, and respect me, right? But you can see that it's robotic. You can see that underneath that, there's something they're at war with that is present in how they interact with me. And I've had people like that on my swim team. I've had, like, people like that in audiences. I've had people like that in my daily life who, when they learn of my transness, something changes, right? And they can call me the right name. They can maybe even vote for the people that would protect my rights. But there's something underneath there. And again, it's similar. It's not that transness is the problem, but it's whatever it stirs in them. And so I think allyship, there's superficial allyship, which is, again, all those logistics: fight for our rights, call us the right name, don't be an outward asshole, right? And so on. But the true allyship begins with ourselves. And so that's what I write about in my book, which is actually the first part of allyship is not actually calling anybody a name or any pronouns. It's actually asking yourself, what's going on with you? What are the biases you have? What are the examples of gender diversity you've experienced? What is your experience with your own gender? Because y'all cis people forget all the time that you have a gender too, right? And understanding your own gender is actually really key, kind of like loving yourself first. If we don't understand understand that we all have an experience with gender and we all are limited by gender, then we can't really begin to have true allyship with trans people. So that's one of the things that I try to point out in my book, is that this gender conversation is actually not the problem with trans people, but rather the lack of everybody's investigation of their own gender.
I have a question for Schuyler. And this kind of connecting back to leadership, obviously, as the first transgender athlete to compete in NCAA Division I male sport, that leadership position, to what extent was that something that was on your mind? To what extent were you a transgender man who loves swimming? Like, how did that kind of come to be? And I suppose I know that OB is Man Enough is not about you, but is maybe inspired by you, so I may be merging the two of you in this, but like, I'm guessing there was a huge passion for swimming. And so where did that kind of leadership journey come from?
Well, to answer your question, or to address what you said about Obi, so Obi is a 13-year-old trans kid. He's also Korean American. He's also, like I said, transgender and a swimmer. So he is me, but he's not, right? And I kind of wrote Obi in kind of alignment with what you said about healing, writing books as healing. Obi was the ode to the boyhood I never had, right? I never had this boyhood. I didn't transition when I was a kid. I didn't get to be me in the way I wanted to when I was a kid, and Obi does. And so that's sort of Obi's version of me, if you will. To your question about, was I a trans man who likes swimming a lot, or was I constantly like every stroke like first trans athlete like as in the pool? I think there's probably I probably never swam thinking every stroke like I am first trans athlete, right? But it was on my mind, right? And I think the reason I think sometimes I stumble in answering this question is because there's a little bit of like, hindsight is 2020. I think if you'd asked me this question when I was in the pool at the time, I would have said, no, I just, the pool is the place I get to ignore everything and just go into the water and just swim and everything's great. And I think that was true to an extent, but I think I was also doing a lot of compartmentalizing. And I gave 102 speeches about my experience as a trans athlete before I graduated from Harvard. So think about the fact that I'm doing school, I'm also swimming for 20 hours a week, and I'm also traveling to do 102 speeches. I was like all over the place. And I think that the pressure of being this first trans athlete was very high. And so the leadership for me that I actively stepped into and I actively assumed, the leadership for me felt like I have to show people that this is possible, and I have to be happy while doing it. And I have to show people that I can be this happy, healthy, and I mean healthy not in like how my body looks. I mean healthy as in like I'm okay, right? I'm better now. I'm not as mentally ill as I was because I've been struggling so much. I felt a lot of pressure to lead by showing people that there are happy stories for trans people. And I think a lot of the happiness I showed was real. I don't think I ever lied about my happiness, but I think I didn't share as much about the difficulty. And so that's actually something I brought into my new book, the one that's coming out in October, He, She, They. I do talk a lot about the parts that were more difficult, and they don't take away from the parts that were great. They just add a little bit more, I think, full-bodiedness to the story that talked a lot about actually, I guess, my leadership that I figured out along the way that came from how I navigated really difficult moments of being very alone. And I think leadership, and one of the reasons I'm so inspired, I think, Jim, by your work, is that leadership for me has always felt deeply lonely, and that comes from being a pioneer in some ways, but it also comes from not knowing how to build systems. I don't know how to build a team. I don't know how to attract the right crew of people that I'm going to take with me for 15 years. I would love that. Like, anybody here want to work for me for 15 years, please come sign up. But I think leadership for me has been deeply lonely, and I think one of the primary things I'm taking away from All Pride No Ego is that it doesn't have to be.
And thanks for that. And it did occur to me, compartmentalization is also a really useful skill for athletes.
Yes. You're making your body do what it does not want to do. Right. And you must tell it, no, I'm not going to listen when you say ouch.
Right, and sort of shutting out the world as if it doesn't matter when, But to pick up on another thing you mentioned, this will be my last question before we open up to the audience, so please think about what you'd like to ask. I think there can be that pressure for queer people or anyone in a pioneer role, like everything has to go great. Because like you're the first one doing something, and if it doesn't go well, even though it's not like all the other people who've done that have always had everything go well, but somehow it has to go really well for you, because if not, then like there never will be another one or something, right? We're sort of very like auditioning all the time. I guess how do we sort of move away from that? I appreciate the places, you know, Jim, that you talked about that didn't go well, and in fact, for me, those were some of the most kind of meaningful parts. But how do we enable ourselves as queer leaders to sometimes have things go really well, but also sometimes not, because that's actually a much more realistic way to live?
I love that's your last question. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think for me, you know, I wrote about, and again, you're a historian. I mean, there's an incredible book that I read when I was younger called The Best Little Boy in the World, and I think that I overcompensated because of my perceived deficiencies and differences. And so I was like, I'm going to be smarter. I'm going to work harder. I was not a natural athlete like Schuyler. Schuyler had talents I didn't have, but anything I did, I wanted to be really good at. And in a weird way, it's because I was proving to everybody that my queerness was not holding me back, like that I was overcoming, again, my own perceived deficiencies. This isn't what people were saying to me outside. And I think it's, when I was writing the book, you know, and I was putting authenticity in the cover, Schuyler was kind of teasing me about that. I was like, well, I can't just tell all the good shit, right? Because that's not authentic. And there was a lot of bad stuff. And I failed. I was fired from a job. I was let go, you know, I was laid off from a job. I had a bad situation at Claire's, but I learned from those situations as well. And what I learned was that's why I didn't only want to be identified as my job. And one of the things I talk about in the book is I had an incredible executive coach at Disney called David Oldfield, and he made me do the tombstone exercise. Some of you may have heard that, where it was like, what do you want written on your tombstone? And I was like, I don't want written on my tombstone that he ran Disney Store and DreamWorks. Like that's not what I want my legacy to be. I want it to be that he made the world a better place, and he was kind, and he had a great family, and he had great friends. And once you put that filter on and you realize, because to me, the job success and that was seeking external validation again. I talk a lot about that in the book. And it's like, no, I've got to validate myself internally, and that yes, I need to own my mistakes and own my failures, but I need to learn from them and move on. And my biggest thing is I just try to not to make the same mistake twice. Like that's my rule. So yeah, I think it's really important. You've got to let go of that perfectionism. And that doesn't matter, queer, straight, bi, trans, like you just got to let go. Nobody is perfect. And anybody who tells you there are is lying. Like there is no such thing as perfection.
Do you want me to answer too?
I think it's audience. Oh, so many hands. I love it.
We do have a microphone back where Kirsten is, so that everyone here and also out in the Zoomosphere can hear you as well.
Do you want to go up there and queue? But yeah, everybody can make a line up there, and we can ask. We could also just ask and we could repeat, but either one works. Go for it. While you're going, I want to add something, which is that when I think about the question of like the pressure that you were talking about, that I was talking about being like a leader, one of the things that we miss is that we need to be able to shift, but we also need society to be able to shift, right? It's how society receives failure from within the community, right? Like if I had shared that something had gone wrong and it was like, oh, see, look at how bad it is for trans athletes to be on teams, we shouldn't let them play, right? That wouldn't have been on me. That would have been on society. So I think it's actually, and it's all of us, because we attack our own, we cannibalize our own very quickly. It's something that me and Jim were talking about earlier as well, and I talk about a lot with community. People are really quick to try to attack each other. And I think part of building community, that at least that I want to build, is how can I inspire and lift and encourage my peers to be better, and how can they do the same to me? Not how can I tell them that they're wrong, right? How can we invite each other in? And that my peers are wrong, I'm wrong. We have to do it well together. And I think it's a little bit of, we're going to open a can of worms with this statement, but it's a little bit of cancel culture. That's the problem, where somebody says something wrong and everybody wants to say, whoop, that person's out, no more, right? And I think it's on all of us, because society is made up of every single one of us, to be better at receiving other people when they make a mistake. That doesn't mean making space for bigotry. It doesn't mean making space for people who are mean, but it does mean how can we move forward together?
Hi, so my name is Diamond. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you about your talk about reframing your mindset, about how you're not the problem. It's, other people's opinions that's keeping you from getting where you need to go. Because most of my struggles have come not from my queerness, but as a person who deals with mental disability. I've been dealing it with for the past 5 years, and I have also gotten bullied, shamed, outcasted, pretty much all of what you could name. And for a long time, and even sometimes still now, I've always thought that I was the problem, that I wasn't accepted because I was a problem or because I wasn't good enough. But after hearing this now, I can finally say that maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe it's just other people who don't want to accept that I'm here and this is who I am.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Diamond, and thanks for sharing all about yourself too. And that's really powerful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy, and I have a question for both of you. So, being people who are essentially pioneers, especially for LGBTQ people in workforces and in sports, there's a lot of perseverance that I can tell just by hearing your stories that takes to get to these positions. What were some of the little wins that you had along the way that helped you persevere through this?
You want to go first? Skylar's going to give me go first. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was, it was getting certain jobs, but not necessarily just getting the promotion, but it was just stepping back. There was a moment when I was president of Disney Store, which was by far my favorite job I ever had. And I remember just stepping back one day and being like, we're doing really good work. Like, I just looked around at the team, and it had been 3 hard years, and it was post the recession, and I just remember, I totally remember the feeling of just one day sitting at work, and I was in a meeting, and I just kind of looked up, and it was just like the mood or the energy in the room, and that carried me for a long time. Like that's one of those moments where I was like. And just, my mom always said I wasn't good at stopping and smelling the roses. I think you'll understand that. Like, she was like, oh my God, you're always looking for the next thing. And that was like one of those stop and smell the roses moments of just, okay, we've done a lot of hard work. It's been rough, but we're good right now. And I want to remember that. I want to remember that feeling.
My dad always tells me to stop and smell the roses, so I feel that. One of the things I've thought a lot about is that I think, and I think about it in an athletic mindset actually, success isn't always succeeding, it's sometimes just not giving up. And I think on the best days, success feels like success, but on the worst days, success, again, is just not giving up. And I think about this, again, in an athletic context. Like, I'll give you a specific example. One day I walked into a new swim team when I was 16 years old, and the coach wrote on the board 30 times 100 race, which meant we had to do 100 yards racing, like sprinting, all out effort 30 times. And I had never been asked to do it more than like 4 times in a row. They wanted to do it 30 times. So I looked at the board and I was like, this is a joke, right? This has got to be a joke. But he starts explaining it, and we start doing the set. Everybody starts and pushes off and starts to do the set. And I'm like, there's no way I can finish 30 repeats of this. I'm tired after 1. And so I said to myself, okay, well, I'll just do 2. And then I'll tell the coach that I have to go. So I did 2, and I thought, well, I guess I could do like a few more. So I did 5, and I thought, okay, I've got 5 now. I'll do 10, and then 10 sounds reasonable, and then I'll get out. So I did 10, and I thought, all right, well, I've already made it to 10. I might as well make it halfway. You see how I'm going, right? And so pretty much I finished, and I was wagering with myself the entire time. Even to like 28, I was like, you know what? 28's good enough. I'm going to stop here. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do 1 more, right? And so I finished all 30. But my point is that I wasn't like, I was like, I'm succeeding. Like, it was like, I'm just not stopping, right? I'm just not failing. And I think that and I did really well over time with that same mindset. It was the next practice. I was like, how am I even going to do a whole nother practice? Like, I just did 2 hours of this. I have to do it again tomorrow, right? And keep repeating. And that mindset of like, no, you just have to do the next thing. And sometimes the next thing is the whole 100. Sometimes it's the whole race. Sometimes it's the whole practice. Sometimes it's a second. It's a breath. It's a stroke, right? And I think for me, a lot of getting through the bigger things was making them smaller, right? What are the tiny, small things that you can do that make up the big things that allow us to be able to be whatever type of perseverant you want to be, whether that be being, an executive, a CEO, an athlete of some kind, a business owner, an artist, whatever it is. I think we think a lot about success as just success, and it's really not that. It's everything that kind of compounds to make that. One of my favorite books that talks about this is called Atomic Habits, which maybe you've heard about. And one of the examples, this guy, James Clear, he's the author, talks about, he's like, if you melt an ice cube and you heat it from, let's say the ice cube is 20 degrees, okay? We all know that ice cubes melt at 32. If you heat it from 20 degrees until 31 degrees, the ice cube will not melt. And you might say, well, nothing's happened. I put in all this effort and nothing's happened. But if you heat it just 1 more degree, it melts. Does it melt because you just did that 1 degree? Or does it melt because you've been heating it slowly from 20 degrees and nothing happened, right? The analogy here is a lot of times success doesn't look like success. And perseverance just feels like not giving up, and that's okay. That was a long answer. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Francis. I use they, them pronouns. My question kind of goes with what you were just saying about persevering. There's kind of no good way to mince words. We as queer people, especially as young queer people and trans people, are kind of having a shit time right now in terms of politics. And we're a population that's really vulnerable to depression and suicide and self-harm and self-hatred and all those kind of things. So what kind of words of advice do you have for young queer people who maybe can't quite see and, happy, fulfilling adult queer life for themselves? Yeah.
That's real. Yeah, I mean, it's so real. It's hard because Schuyler and I talked about this in the car too. He mentioned it earlier. We're very aware, both of us, as the roles that we've assumed now, the environment that we're working in. Like when I wrote my book, I never knew it was going to come out in this environment. Like it almost like the book took on a sense of urgency that I wasn't ready for in many ways. But I mean, the one thing I will say is, and we maybe are overusing this word now, is you're not alone. There is a community, and you're not the only one feeling that way. And I think many times the isolation of the pandemic, the isolation of queerness, the isolation of mental health makes you think you're the only one feeling that way. And so I beg people to reach out, and there are so many more resources available now than when I was having those feelings. And it's like, access those resources and never be ashamed to say, I'm struggling and I'm scared and I'm fearful and I'm afraid of what the world is doing, because you're not the only one feeling it. And it's not just young people, it's us old queers too. And I moved from California, where I probably took it for granted that I was protected. And I live in Georgia now, where I can't take it for granted. I'm protected in Atlanta, but I'm not protected in the state of Georgia. I mean, Georgia's right behind Florida and Texas, probably for being the most inhospitable towards our community. And I feel like I talk to my friends about it, and I talk to my therapist. I still go to therapy. I talk to my therapist about it. And this is where that chosen family and that network comes in. And we have very honest conversations with each other. And so the great thing about your generation and technology, you can connect physically, you can connect digitally, just connect. That's what I'm saying, is just connect and own it. And it's everything you said, we're all feeling. Different experiences, different contexts. It's not an easy time to be in the queer community right now. And they're trying to legislate, you mentioned it, they're trying to legislate our life out of existence. They're literally trying to push us back into closets that I thought were open forever. And part of why I think Schuyler does what he does, part of what I'm doing is I write in the book that, like, just by living your lifestyle, you become an activist. And I feel like I have to use my platform now to say to people, this is the allyship he was talking about. That's wrong. That, like, what you're saying is wrong. That is not what the queer community stands for. That is not what we do. And we have every right to live a full, authentic, happy life. And one of the things that has kicked in for me is all politics are local, because one of the things I think we missed as a queer community, I'll be honest, and as the left, is school boards and city councils and mayors, because honestly, that's where we're getting attacked more. We all talk about the president, right? Okay, yeah, the president can do a lot, the Senate can do a lot, the Supreme Court can do a lot, but honestly, some of our biggest problems are local. It's school boards who are banning books. It's school boards who are not doing all gender bathrooms or single gender, like it's school boards that are doing that. And I think a lot of times we don't even think about the school board elections. We're like, oh, Sally Joe's running for school board. It's like, oh, okay. That city council, mayor, governor, you know, the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas are the problem, to your point. It's not the national legislature. It's these local and state municipalities that we really, and I feel like we have to go. Schuyler and I were saying in the car, he was asking me, do you have a Florida swing yet on the book tour? I'm like, I don't have Florida and Texas, and I need to, because we have to go, like, into the mouth of the fire and tell our truths. We have to, for you, for the next generation.
Everything that Jim said. I want to add, my answer might sound like a downer, so bear with me. But whenever somebody asks, like, what would I tell a young person, a queer person, the last thing I want to do is gaslight you. The last thing I want to do is tell you that you shouldn't feel how you feel. And one of the things I find a lot of parents and a lot of well-meaning adults do to young people, I know y'all are probably, some of you are over 18, so y'all are all adults, but I still feel like a kid at 27, so you're going to be a kid for now. One of the things that adults say a lot to us is, oh, don't feel that way. You're fine. You're going to be okay. Like, everything's fine. Like, we'll get through it. And all those things might be true, right? We probably, a lot of us will be okay. You know, this will go away. I believe deeply in that. But it's not okay right now, right? It's actually not okay right now. And for a lot of young people, y'all have even less agency for it to be okay, right? I could up and leave if I wanted to, because I have the financial freedom, because I'm an adult, because I don't have a job that ties me to a specific location. Jim could do the same thing, right? Both of us have a big amount of privilege now that a lot of young people don't have. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm going to recognize and validate how terrifying then it is. That's more terrifying for maybe somebody who isn't one of us, right? And I think we miss that. And I think systemically people miss that when they start adding other identities as well. When we think about disabled folks, when we think about Black folks, Indigenous folks, femme folks, we could go on, right? I think it's important to recognize that, and I just want to validate. I think that's the first thing I always want to say to somebody who says, I'm struggling, this hurts, there's a lot going on. Like, I want to validate, like, yeah, this does suck. This is really hard. This is an unprecedented amount of anti-trans, anti-queer attacks that we've never seen before. That is true. Will we get through it? I believe 100%. But are we going to lose some stuff along the way? Also, yeah. And that's hard. That's painful. There is still hope, and I want to hold both, and I think that's why I want to say, like, it sounds dark, and it is, but it also, there's always light as well. And I think we have to learn how to compartmentalize and hold both, that we can validate how we feel now, say, ouch, this really, really hurts. And I'm not going to try to trick myself into thinking that it doesn't, and I can see that there's so much more here. One of the things I like to think a lot about is Marsha P. Johnson. Maybe you know who she is. Lots of head nods. Okay, so black trans woman who lived in the 60s, often unhoused, had way fewer resources than we had now, and still most of the photos of her are her beaming, smiling with a beautiful flower wreath on her head. And I always think to myself, if Marsha P. Johnson could do that, could find that kind of happiness, to stand in her queerness, her transness in a place that didn't even have the word transgender, we can find some way to do that now, right? So standing on the shoulders of who came before us and who was able to find power before us, largely Black and brown, queer and trans women, really, really important to remember that, right? we can be here now, right? So both are true, right? Validating that past and existing here in the reminder that there's been so much resilience that we're standing on. And the last thing, or maybe not a last thing.
Done, yeah, I think that we should done.
Next question.
We have 3 more
Next
questions.
question. I'll say that later.
Hello, I'm also Francis, she, they pronouns. I have more of one thing to say before my question. It's more of a thank you for being here. The main reason why I wanted to be part of the BARD Queer Leadership Project was to gain more knowledge and tool sets I can bring to wanting to bring activacy to the fields I wanted to entirely be in, which is the medical field, which I believe it's very much needed in our current climate, especially me being from Texas. There's some things not doing so well in that standard. And y'all being here and being the start of that journey, I am just 100% grateful for. And so we're moving into my question. Similar to what the other Francis said, but own twist to it in that standard. Y'all have had to deal with a lot of struggles getting in the positions you are right now in that standard. And I wanted to ask for your advice of what you would give to queer or trans youth in that standard of how to make it there safely, but also healthfully in that standard, and be able to navigate through all the transphobia or queerphobia that they may face trying to get to their ambitious goals or dreams.
These are great questions. I'm sorry. There's lots of thunder all of a sudden, right? Like I was like, what's happening? Yeah, it's I think I was thinking a lot when Schuyler was answering the other Francis's question is so much, I was thinking of like a lot of the ways he was saying it. I was also thinking in my head, it's not always about the destination, it's about the journey, right? It's that whole success thing. And I love that you brought up Marsha P. Johnson. I was thinking, sitting next to a historian, that's the other thing that I was going to say is, even though it feels unprecedented, and even though it feels like we're under the worst attack we've ever been in the community, those of us that have lived, I came out during the AIDS crisis, and that was honestly more scary than a school board who's banning books because we were dying. We were literally dying, and we thought we were dying because of our lifestyle, and that we were being punished for our lifestyle. And so I think looking back at history and looking back at the history of queer rights and trans rights and women's rights, by the way, that's what I always talk about. Queer rights are human rights, are civil rights. So women's rights, Black rights, Latinx rights. When you look at the civil rights, the arc of history, including the amazing, Martin Luther King, and just all of that stuff, it is that small victories and being able to look in the mirror and being like, are we better today than we were yesterday? And what can I do to help make a difference? And sometimes it's taking those big, massive goals. I think the 30 repeater sets was a great example, and just breaking it down, because sometimes the goal is so overwhelming. You're like, I'm never going to get there. But instead of thinking of 30, I'm going to think of it in 15 times twos. I'm just going to count to 2 15 times. It does change your mindset. And I think, and I love, one of the things I love about this program, and that you have a historian running the program, is we've been through a lot as a community. And I love that you guys knew who Marsha P. Johnson was. We've been through it. We'll get through it again, and we're going to get through it together, and we're going to have wins and we're going to have losses, and that's life, and that's a democracy. And I write in my book that democracy is right, not a privilege. Privilege, not right, and you got to work at it. And so it's you got to mobilize and vote and get all of you to vote, register to vote wherever you vote. The voice, your generation can make a difference, particularly in the 2024 election. We need the youth. And it's going to be a coalition of youth vote and queer vote and women's votes, and it's going to be a coalition of marginalized communities that can make the difference, not just for president. I'm saying up and down the ballot, up and down the ticket.
Next question.
My name is Bart, and my question, I have two of them. One is, which queer leaders have inspired you, and what did you learn from them? And before I let you answer, I wanted to say that my four are Sylvester, Harvey Milk, Larry Kramer, and somebody that people probably haven't heard of, Stephen Dean, who created the Human Rights Campaign Fund and who I worked for as the first AIDS lobbyist. And so I think one of the powers of this leadership project is that queer leadership is going to exist in a historical context, and that we're going to study queer leadership as a thing. And it's really powerful when we realize that we come from gigantic titans who did incredible things. Barry Russell is another name I'd put in there, who designed the first civil rights, march, and was a, fairly out queer black man. Anyway, I'd love to hear your answer to those two questions.
You want me to do that first? I feel like you always make me go first.
Oh, sorry. I thought
okay.
I can go first.
But I'll go first. Okay, I have two. It's fine. I was like, I don't want to, we're on a rhythm.
Can go.
I love this question too. I mean, for me personally, I have a huge amount of respect for Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and I'm blessed to know him. And he is one of the 4 out gay CEOs and happens to be of the largest or I don't know, it goes back and forth, top 1, 2, or 3. And how he moves through life, and I've watched him, how he moves through life is amazing and is really, really important for our community. And I'd say the other one, and I will say it's a little bit of a double-edged sword for me because I also worked in Hollywood, but is Ellen DeGeneres, because representation matters. And I think what she did, and what she went through, because she went through a lot when she did come out, but she took that persona and was in people's homes, particularly with the talk show Ellen, and she made us feel not threatening. She made us feel normal in a way. And so I would say, and she was definitely a pioneer, in the history. I mean, she was definitely a pioneer. My other ones are athletes, but I'm betting he's going to pick an athlete, so I'm going to hold out.
Well, I want to hear your athletes. Which one are you?
Billie Jean King. Probably because I've been watching the U.S. Open this week, but I mean, really, what she did, because what she did for women's rights, and we could do this topic forever, but what she did for women's rights, and then what she did for gay rights, and the equal pay for women and equal representation in tennis, definitely Billie Jean.
I always struggle to answer this question, and I usually feel some shade of embarrassment or shame when I struggle to answer this question. And it's because I really didn't consume a lot of media when I was a kid. I didn't watch a lot of movies. I wasn't allowed to watch TV. My mom is an interesting, lovely human, but she didn't let me listen to music. So if you put all those things together, I consumed very little about the world that was role model centric. My mom did a great job of giving me books, so I read a lot of books about Korean people, because she felt that I was not going to have enough about Korean people in my life. There was a few books about mixed race kids and very few and far in between, but that I sort of saw myself in. But I guess what I'm trying to say, and again, the reason I struggle answering this question is I didn't see a lot of people like me. I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm mixed race, I'm an athlete, I'm a student, and we put all those things together. I found often that everything was a dead end, right? Somebody had a piece of my identity, but there wasn't much else. And I think I feel embarrassment when I struggle to answer this question, because I know there's so many people, titans, as you said, on whose shoulders we both stand. We all stand, and I don't ever want to get rid of the credit or be dismissive of the people who fought for how I could stand here today. So I could name a bunch of people that I know that wrote the rules for the NCAA inclusion handbook that allowed me to compete in sports, but you won't know any of their names. I could name the people who carried me when I cried and when I fell and when I had struggles in my childhood and in my years of competing as an athlete and then transitioning and being on the men's team, but you probably won't know their names either. So a lot of my role models are people, real people in my life. Not that Tim Cook and Ellen aren't real people, but they're kind of not to a lot of people. But a lot of my role models were people that were immediately impactful in my life, that were present there, that I took pieces from, right? So my dad is the most curious person I know, and I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be curious just like him, which I know you write about is one of your book learnings. My mom loves more fiercely than anybody I know, and I wanted to make sure I held on to that. And then coaches along the way taught me little things about not giving up or about taking care of myself. But I really struggled to find somebody who was going to be a trans role model to me. And a lot of them I found after the fact, and they're really regular people who live their lives who I see myself in. And I think there's something really powerful about that ordinariness that can be transcendent.
We have time for one more question. Maybe two.
Yeah, I won't answer. It'll be faster.
So my name's Jake, and this question kind of goes out to both of you, but Schuyler, you were talking about it a little bit earlier already. I guess I'm kind of wondering how you navigate what you described as the queer cannibalism within the community. I think it's one of the fastest.
Did I say that?
But I think it's an apt term. It's one of the kind of fastest growing problems within our community. Obviously, it's outside the community. There are much bigger problems that are happening pretty rampantly, but within our community, I think it's one of the fastest growing problems to see this kind of position of like, I'm queer and you're queer too, but we're queer different, and we're going to focus on the different and not the similarities. And I know I experienced that quite a bit. And so I guess I would just love to hear kind of how you navigate that, having, I assume, at least been doing it for a little bit longer than I have.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So you actually named the crux of the problem, which is that you said I'm queer different, here I'm queer, you're queer, we're queer different somehow, and instead of dealing with the bigger problems which are outside of the community, we're dealing with the queer different or whatever. So the other side, the anti-trans rhetoric, the anti-queer rhetoric, the anti-black rhetoric, the anti-women rhetoric, the blah blah, we can go on the list, right? They are excellent at putting aside their differences and unifying. They are very good at that. In fact, that is their number one skill, and they are so good at it that they make everybody believe a lot of bullshit. Right? So a lot of lies, like not little lies, like straight up lies. Like they said Leah Thomas is a trans swimmer, competed in the 100 butterfly. She has never swum the 100 butterfly in the past 10 years, right? But they're so good at their propaganda that they all had the unified message, right? So we need to do a little bit more of the unifying. We don't need to do the lying, but we need the unifying. And it is a huge problem that we cannot unify. The reason, though, we can't unify is actually really, really important. And that's something we do have to care for and heal. And the reason we can't unify is scarcity, is the amount of pain we're under causes us to be hurt deeply by our peers. The folks who are white, cisgender, straight, and rich and have never dealt with a marginalized identity, they don't have a lot of scars that they can be hurt by. Are they in pain? Sure. And I'm not trying to say that other people don't have pain. They do. And actually that fuels their hatred. But they don't have the same kind of, I think, vulnerabilities that we might have within each other that causes us to be so easily pitted against each other. And what I think the core problem is, and this is what I recommend you think about and what we can all think about, is that when, let's say, I'll use Jim as an example, right? So Jim's cisgender and I'm not, right? So that's a clear difference that we can have. We could fight about that. I could say he has privilege that I don't, which he does, and we could have a whole thing about that, right? And he could sit in his thing and say, well, I'm marginalized too because I'm gay, and I can be like, well, I'm marginalized too because I'm trans. And we could do this whole thing of who's higher on the hierarchy of systemic oppression, and it might be valuable for us to do that without anger, right? Just to talk about it and learn. But let's say we did it angrily, right? Who is dividing us? If that happened, if we're having this fight, are we dividing us, or is systemic oppression dividing us? Are we the enemies, or is transphobia, queerphobia, ableism, white supremacy, ageism, whatever else, are those the systems that are dividing us? I think what we often miss is the contextual systemic issues that are actually causing the problem, right? So let's say I'll use a clear example. I've had an issue once when I said something online that I didn't realize was anti-black, and it was. I got called in. I got very angrily attacked, and I had to take a moment where I stepped back and looked at what happened. And it took me a little bit of time to figure out, because I was like, I'm not racist, and I did that whole thing first. And then I actually learned about it, and what I learned was there was like a lot of pain there, and I could have been angry at other queer people for yelling at me. Or I could realize that anti-blackness and this systemic oppression was the problem. And I had to reorient, right? So we have to see that systemic oppression would be the thing that divides me and Jim, not Jim or Schuyler.
Hi, my name is Alice. I use she, ze pronouns. And I was wondering if you had advice for finding or making or asserting a space for yourself in a field that is very alienating to us.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I know there's so many, I talk a lot about this on the tour. There's so many fields and places in the country that are harder and more inhospitable to our community than others. Yeah, I wish I had a magic pill. I don't have a magic pill, but you know, I just keep coming back to like build that network, build your family, build your community, and that's where you're going to draw your strength from. And make sure, and I'm not being cavalier about this, just make sure you have real passion for that field if you're going to be the pioneer, right? Because what you're basically signing up to be is the pioneer. So make sure that you have real passion for whatever that field is, because at the point you are in your life, you can still pivot, and it may be easier to go to an adjacent field that's more hospitable. But if you are passionately committed to that particular field, then you're going to be a pioneer. And then take this time, particularly when you're here at Bard, build that tough skin and build that network, because you know that you're going to be blazing a trail. You're going to be a trailblazer. And we need you to do that. If you want to do it, and we'll all be there for you, but just be ready.
Well, I think we will end it with that. And I again wanted you to know that Schuyler and Jim will both be signing books out in the lobby if you'd like to get those, and we can have some more conversation there. I do want to just express my great appreciation to Schuyler and Jim for joining us. I could not imagine a greater start to the Bard Queer Leadership Project than what you've had to say. So thank you so much. And I'd also like to express my appreciation to Carla for co-hosting with me tonight and co-creating this wonderful project, so thank you. And my appreciation to all of you, whether you're here in the space with us in person or out in our virtual world. Thank you so much for joining and coming today to build community with us. I'm so grateful, and thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night.